Alright, so currently when we play our game, we have this set up quite a bit to work okay. Um, and the way that we have it currently set is that if I select the player here, I click back in here, you'll see that right here we have this ground attribute, right? And when we jump, you can see it turns on and off. The way this is currently functioning is that underneath the player, I have this ground check object, right? And basically what it does is it sends to the player, and then if it's got a trigger on it, and it has this ground check script, and basically if it hits the ground, it says, oh, you're touching the ground, and then it tells it. What would be better than doing that, we could get rid of this altogether if instead on the player controller script we use a raycast. Okay, so the raycast is a little bit different. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's cleaner. I'm doing air quotes right now, but it's like cleaner to work with. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the player. Actually, before I even do that, let's back this thing up. Okay, let's get closer. So I got this platform. Is this just another platform? Okay, let's do the first platform because that's where we're underneath. And right now where it says tag, let's just make it untagged. And I just want to do this so you get a point that if we're falling, we should fall straight through it. Well, I can't jump, right? Okay, so you get the idea that we're not allowed to jump because it doesn't have ground on it. Okay, so the physics aspect is still working, but it doesn't allow us to jump because it's not saying that we're on the ground. So now what we're going to do is we're going to detect ground a different way. We're going to use raycast to do that instead. So let's go ahead and open up player controller. And open it up over here. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to detect two things. So we already have public bool ground, but I also want to test against the public bool, and we're going to test against the ceiling. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to test whether we're touching the ground, and then when we're jumping, we're going to tell ourselves to stop jumping when we touch the ceiling. So we can test both the ground and the ceiling. So we're going to test what's above our head and also what's underneath us. Okay, and again, this is nice because I don't have to worry about using a collider of any sort. Okay. Some other things I want to add is we have this rigid body, body 2D, player 2D, whatever. I'm going to add another one here, private, and it's going to be a type of box collider 2D, and we'll just call it player box collider 2D. Probably should find a better abbreviation, but that is what we have. Pardon the sneeze. So basically this is going to store the box collider. It actually doesn't have a huge value. I'll show you why we're doing it in a little bit, but I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. We'll start with that. Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing we're going to do is this. I'm going to do another private because I only really care about it being here. And it's going to be a type of ray cast hit 2D, and we'll just call it hit. Okay. Basically, what this is going to be is that when we cast a ray, when we cast a ray, what it's going to do is it's going to detect something. This is what we're going to cast. This is this ray hat, or this ray cast hit 2D, and it's going to save it as hit. And this hit is going to be where it's stored. Okay. All right. Now, the one other thing we need to do is this. When we test, just like when we're down here, or actually, is it in this one? It is not this one. Let's go here. Let's do the ground check script. When we do the ground check script, we do this void on trigger enter, and we store the collider of the object we hit, and then we test the tag of the object that we hit. That's not what we're going to use. We're actually not going to use a tag. Instead, what we are going to use is going to be a layer mask. Okay, so I'm just going to close out of this guy because we don't really need it. But we're not going to use the the tag, we're going to use this. So on the platform here, that's the first one. Good. We're going to add. You notice that we've been using tags. There's also another thing called layers. It kind of works similarly, but it's more broad. So we're going to go ahead and add a layer. And you can see the next one available is this one. And we'll just call it ground. Okay? So just remember calling it ground. Go back to platform and again make sure that ground is available. Now you will notice that it goes from 5 and then it's because Unity uses, there's other ones built in there, but Unity is using them for other things. I don't remember what they are, but they're like various things that the engine itself is using. So anyway, so ours is actually going to be 8. That is important because you don't detect it by the name, you detect it by the number, and the number is 8. Okay, so let's go here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to store that layer mask. So we're going to do private, if I could spell, private layer mask. That is going to be the type, and it's going to be, well, I'm going to call it ground mask because that's what it is. And this is kind of a weird thing, but you're going to do 1 arrow 8. Or sorry, I did 9. 8. Basically, it's always going to be a 1 here, and then this is going to be the layer mask. Okay, so whatever that number is, in our case it's 8, that's what we are storing is actually going to be that. Okay, so this is going to be necessary later on. All right, so we've now added all the variables that we needed, which is basically these. Sorry, not those. These 3 and this one. First thing I want to do is go ahead and store that box collider of the player, just like we stored the rigid body. So it's going to be player box collider 2D, and we're going to get it to be get component, and the component we're going to get is a surprise, box collider 2D. Boom, boom. It's a method. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, so it's going to find the box collider that this script is attached to, which is currently the player object, and it's going to store it in player box collider 2D. Fantabulous. All right. That looks good. So one of the things we've been doing, and we've been doing everything in update. Okay, so update, there are actually 2 updates. There is update, and then there is fixed update. So let's do void fixed update. And boop, like that. Okay, you might be saying to yourself, what is the difference? Or why is there another update? So update is every rendered frame. Okay, so basically what it means is that every frame that the user is seeing, it does these actions. Fixed update is every physics frame. What that means is that this is a set increment at an exact amount that never changes. So basically what we're saying is 1 second is 1 second here. Okay? So let's say we were running a game and it's running at 24 frames, or let's say 60 frames per second, because that's like the go-to, right? So let's say we're running a game and it's 60 frames per second. Now, if we put that, whatever we were doing in here, in the update, and the game's supposed to run at 60 frames per second, it should, when it shows whatever the code is, it should run 60 frames per second. However, I'm sure you played games where the frames start to lag, where it drops below 60 frames. What happens is that it still goes based on what you're seeing. So even if you wanted something to happen from some sort of physical sense, it's not actually going to show it. It's going to be the speed of what you are rendering. So if it drops, what happens drops. So it won't be the speed that you're looking at. However, if you do something on fixed update, it doesn't matter what you see. It's always 60 frames per second. This is 100% always going to be whatever it is. I mean, as long as it's able to keep up with what the code is. Obviously, the code can still drop, but That's basically what the difference is between the two. Okay, so typically what this means is that things you show the player go here. So when you're asking for inputs, you put them on update, because the player is going to put in what they're pushing, right? They're going to push jump based on what they're seeing, not on what's actually happening. So, you know, that would be what's here, but what they're seeing is on update. So, inputs go here, but the actual like physics typically go in fixed update, because that's real time. You know what I mean? So, it sort of absolves of some of that. All right. So, that being said, what I want to do is this. I basically want to run two new functions. I want a function that's going to test whether we're hitting the ground, and I want a function that's going to test whether we're hitting the ceiling, okay? That's basically the be all end all. And we're going to make one function, and we're just going to duplicate it to make the other one, because they're basically kind of the same. It's just one's going towards the ground, and one's going towards the sky. That's really what we're hitting. Okay, so we're going to make two functions, and basically, if you look, I have two things here. I have a ground and a ceiling. So we'll just do the ground one, and then we'll copy it to do the other. So what we're going to say is ground, which, if you remember, is a Boolean, okay, up here. It's a public bool. Doesn't need to be public. I just have it as public so I can see it in the inspector. Really, it should probably be private. I don't think anything else is accessing it. There might be something else, but I don't believe it is. Oh, well, there was before, because I was using the ground check script, so it had to have access to it, so it had to be public. But now that we're doing it in here, I could actually switch it back to private. But I'm going to leave it public just so that I can see that it's working. Okay, so we're going to do ground, and we're going to set that equal to, and we're going to make a new function called, oops, not like that, ground check, just ground check. Not script, ground check, semicolon. So what's going to do is ground, and it's going to call this script called ground check. Okay. Now we need that script. So again, void ground check. Boom. And enter it. Boom, like that. Okay. So that looks pretty okay. So in ground check, we need to send it something. So you can see it's already red. But basically what I want to do is a raycast. Okay, so there's all sorts of things you can let with raycast. I basically looked it up and then I just kind of configured it. But if you remember, we made a raycast hit 2D, and we called it hit. Basically what I want to do is utilize this. I want to make hit equal to something. So we want to shoot out a ray. We're going to call it hit, and we're going to store whatever it does inside of hit. So we're going to say hit is going to be equal to, raycasts are part of the physics engine, physics 2D, because we're doing 2D, dot, this is like a sub method of it, raycast, and the raycast is going to ask for a couple of things, and I'm going to hover over it, and it says basically it needs a vector to origin, which means that it needs an XY, so where it starts from, a vector to direction, okay? So it needs where it starts and where it's going, and it actually needs more than that. I don't know why it's only showing those things, but anyway. So basically I need to put where it's going to start from. I want it to start from the position of the player. So in this case, the position is just going to be transform.position. And then, oops, not that, comma. So basically I want it to start from, in this case, if I write transform position, that means the position of whatever this is attached to, and in that case it's going to be the player. So basically I want to start from wherever the player is. That's the first parameter, okay? So boom, I want to start from there. Then it wants the direction of the thing. Okay, I want it to shoot downwards. This is going to sound kind of weird, but so what we're going to do is a vector 2 dot up, but minus. So I don't want to go up, I want to do the opposite of up. So I'm going to do a minus vector 2 up. So there's also vector 2 dot right. So if I want to shoot left, I do minus vector 2 dot right. Okay, so it's just a shortcut, but basically it's saying go downwards. That's what this is going to do, right? Because it's X, Y. Okay, so that's the direction. That looks good. Now what I need to do is it's going to want the distance that I'm going to shoot this. Okay, so actually now it's showing it. Float distance. Now it wants the distance. This is where this one thing comes into play. So you remember before I put in this private Box Collider 2D, blah, 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 blah. I actually didn't need to do this, but I'm just using it because I feel like it's useful. So basically I stored the Box Collider into that variable. So what I'm going to do is this. If we were to look at, where are you at? Not that one. If we were to look at this, and let's go to player, come here, and then I'll hit F to frame. Okay, so it's this one on the inside, okay? This is the Box Collider. What I want to do is it's going to start from its origin, which is right in the center, right? See this circle here? That's the origin. What I want to do is I need it to shoot out at least enough to go beyond this object, right? So what that means is if I look at the player and then I look at this Box Collider, you can see where it says size here, and it says like X is this and Y is this. That means that right now the size of this is 0.73 almost, right? 0.729. That means that this is basically 3/4 of a unit. And if you look, this square is a unit, so that's about right. It's about 3/4 of a unit. Okay, so I need to shoot this basically half of that, and then a little bit more. I want to go beyond what this is, so I need to shoot it half of 3/4 of a unit, and then a little bit more, so that it goes beyond this Box Collider. Make sense? Okay. So that's how far I would like it to go. Okay. So that's why I stored it, because we're going to use that number, and that's why this will work on any code. I don't have to put in, I don't have to test a bunch of numbers and be like, oh, I think it's 1 unit, because otherwise I have to go in here and be like, oh, how many? If I'm at the origin here, how many units is that down? Like 1 unit would be enough, but then it would be like down here, and it would be testing from the bottom of this all this distance, which is kind of a lot. I want to just go a little bit more. Okay, so not you. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna say player Box Collider 2D, which we already stored, dot size, if I could spell, dot size, dot y, because I'm looking to, I want the size, the y size, and then I'm gonna say half of that, right? So get the idea. So I did Box Collider 2D, that's the Box Collider, and then here's the size. I want the y value, which is this one, and then half of that, right? Because I don't need the full value, I don't need the whole 7.2, I just need to get halfway down. Half of that, but I need to go beyond that, right? Half will only get me to the edge, so I'm gonna do half of that plus, oops, no, it's not a plus, plus 0.1 F. Okay, so basically plus 0.1 units. Now, it might need to be more than that. This number, this 0.1, you might need to up. We will look at it in a second, and you'll be able to tell. But we're going to start with that. That way I want to, keep it small. I'd rather keep it too small than too much. Now, the last thing it wants, it's funny, now it's showing more of it. So I need the origin, where it's going to start from shooting, the direction it's going to shoot in, so you can see down, how far it's going to shoot, and then what it's going to shoot against. So basically what it's testing against. So it's basically, when we were doing the other thing, we do the on trigger enter. What am I testing for? And in this case, I already set it up here. I want to test for the ground mask, which, if you remember, is number 8. So right here, we're literally just going to write, if I could do it, ground mask. Okay, so now this is going to basically create a raycast that's going to start at the position of the player downwards, and the distance of whatever the Box Collider is, half of it, so that, because it starts at the center, plus a little bit more, and it's going to be looking for ground mask. Okay, Then what we're going to do is, I'm just going to do this other thing. This is a help. You don't actually have to do this. You should, just because. And it's going to be debug dot, and this normally you do debug.log. It's going to be draw ray. And what we're going to do for this is it's basically going to be the same thing as what we saw above. So to kind of help us, well, actually we'll just type it out. Okay, so it's going to want the start position. So transform dot position. So when it draws this ray, this is just drawing a ray. So I just want to make sure that this debug draw ray is the same stuff as what's up here. They're not necessarily related. So I want to have the start position be the same. So I'm going to do transform dot position. And then this one's a little bit weird. So if you look, it says vector 3 start. In our case, we're only doing a vector 2, but if it was a vector 3, and then it says vector 3 direction, but it's actually direction times, which I don't really understand, times the, right here, direction is direction and length of ray. So it's actually the direction times the length of the ray. So it's basically, it's this and this together, these two sections together. I think it's a weird way of writing it, but that's how they do it. So we're going to put a couple of parentheses in here, and it's going to be a minus, if you remember, vector 2 dot up, right? So vector 2 dot up multiplied, because that's how they like it. And then I'm going to space it out, and I'm just going to grab this chunk here, these parentheses, Control C, Control V. Okay, so basically the vector 2 up times that box collider 2D business here. Okay, so that's the distance. I want to keep the distance the same as that one. Then it needs a couple of other things. So what it's going to want after that is comma, space. It wants the color. So you can see color of what we're working with. So the color, and you can do whatever color you want. So more than likely your ground's green. So I'm going to go ahead and just do red. That's fine. Then it's going to want the thickness of the line. So I'm just going to do 2. 2 is enough to see. And then the last thing is whether it is obscured by other objects. So if you do true, it means if something's in front of it, you won't see it. If you do false, it means it will be in front of whatever's there. It doesn't matter. I want to do false so I just can see the stupid thing. I don't see why you'd want true, because the whole point is to see it, but that's what it is. Okay, great. So this isn't necessary. It's just to show us a visual representation of what this is. Okay, but this should show what this looks like. So in the future, if this top thing's not working, if you change it, make sure you also change this. Like if I'm like, oh, I need to add, like it's not shooting far enough. If I put like 0.5 here, you want to put 0.5 here so that they are the same, so that you can kind of see. Inevitably, honestly, this can be removed. I'm only putting in there so you can see that it's working. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to test the results of what we had. So we're going to say if hit dot collider, okay, if the collider is boom, exclamation point equals null. What that means is if we hit something, and if we hit, basically what this is saying is that if we hit something, right? So if the hit has a collider that's not nothing, null is nothing. So basically if it's not nothing, then I want you to say return true. And not that stuff. That's not helpful. And or else. That's not helpful. Tab. Oops. Back. Return false. Oops. Okay. And that looks pretty okay. Why is this giving me a void to bool? Ground check. Oh, sorry. So I did a mistake here. So you notice that when we've always been writing all these functions, we always write void. And you may be like, oh, void, right? If you use, what is it? ActionScript, I don't remember. But if you use JavaScript, it's called function, and I think maybe in C+ it's called function. Sometimes they call them functions. You see void. The reason why it's void is void means it returns nothing, which means when I run this function, it just runs the function. It doesn't send anything anywhere. It just says, run it. Like, just run it and don't tell anybody about it. It doesn't matter, right? And here, when I run this thing, I actually don't want void. I want bool. Okay? So, if you put something in here, so you remember like when we've run other functions, there's been other functions when we run them that, well, ground check. Let's open that one up again. When we run ground check, we'll do this void. It's not returning anything. And then this is the name of the function. And then here we have the parameters. Basically, when something gets sent to it, when the function runs and someone say, hey, take this, that gets put in here. Okay, and then we can use that information in here. However, if you're doing the opposite, if you're running a function and you're going to send something out of it, you put that here. So when this function runs, the information it gives back is going to be a bool. So in this case, it's going to run this ground check script, or this ground check function, but what it returns is going to be a bool. And you can also tell, if you do put something in here and it's not void, you may have noticed that this has this return true or return false. These both have to be here. If they are not here, it will not run. If I remove this, see how it goes? Oh, that doesn't make sense. It's because not all paths return a value, because I don't have something here that says a true or false. So it has to return a bool value. So now by having that, because remember ground is actually a bool variable. So basically what's going to do is ground is going to be, which is a bool, true or false, is going to be equal to the value of, or we're assigning the value of, whatever this returns. And in this case, if we do hit something, it's going to say true. And if we don't hit something, and the only reason we're going to hit something is because if it's that ground mask. So if we hit something that's within that ground mask, it will work. So we're going to go ahead and save that and go back here. Give it a second. That's kind of fast. Did you actually work? I find that curious. I don't need this guy anymore. Okay. Find it very curious. Okay. So that's all fine. Now the other thing I need to do is go to this platform. Oh, I already did the layer mask. Okay, good. So now I've hit play. You can see it jumps. Now if you remember, that didn't work because I took this ground thing off, right? Just to give you an idea, if I take this off, see, it doesn't work. But if I put the layer mask on here to ground, it works again. Okay. So now what I want to show you is this other thing too, which is kind of cool. So we're going to take, you see, I can't see that debug thing, but I can do is this. I'm going to take my scene, I'm going to snap it over here. So we're like 50-50. Okay. I'll back this thing up. Now watch. You're going to see. Okay. Oops. Let's jump on this guy. Did I kill him? I did. Okay. Whoa. And I'm ruining it. Okay. So if you look, you can see from the center of the object, it's shooting. This is the debug. It doesn't show up in the game view, but it does show up in the scene view. And it's spawning from the center of this game object. And you can see it's hitting and it's penetrating. Oops. Back this thing up. It's penetrating enough to get into this. Now, if it wasn't enough, I have to take that 0.1f and go higher. But that's good enough. Okay. So now we are now getting a ground check through that. I'm not going to delete the ground check quite yet, this object, but eventually we should be able to, because I can test whether we hit an enemy and instead do something different with that. But for now, we're going to call that good. The other thing I want to do is basically a ceiling check, which is going to be pretty much the same exact thing. So I got this bool here. All right, this bool is a fool. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag, Control C. Control V, and instead of ground check, it's going to be ceiling check. And on my fixed update, which is meant to run physics-based things, we're going to go ahead and do ceiling we're going to give it the value of ceiling check. And I'm bad at writing stuff. There we go. So ceiling check. But this time, I actually am I'm going to take the minus from vector 2 up. I'm going to do it on this one as well. So it actually is shooting up. I need to keep this exactly the same, right? Because it's the Y, so that's fine. And we'll keep it 0.1F. And we'll keep it at ground mask too, because obviously we're going to just make everything ground mask. And then color, instead of red, let's do green. Oh wait, let me see if it's blue. It could be blue or purple. I guess it'd be orange or yellow. We had what, red on the bottom? Let's do yellow. All right, so I'll just do color yellow, and then we'll say false. That's all fine, and I'll save that. Go back in here, and we'll hit play, and you should see. Yep. So you see the. Oh, okay. So now you see we have. It works fine, but you can see we have an array shooting above, an array shooting below, and so we can see both. And actually, I misspoke earlier, because you know where I said like it was. This is how long it lasts for. So right now it's like 2 seconds. I think it's in seconds. If I made 1 second or less, that's what it is. I was thinking it was thickness, but it's actually not thickness. So anyway, that's why you see the trail of them. So you can make that a smaller amount. So basically now when I'm in here, I click in here, I can see what I'm seeing above and what I'm seeing under, and that gives me a pretty good idea of whether we're hitting the ceiling or the ground. Right, so where's my, right here, so it says ground, right? So let's see if I can get my ceiling to go off. So I gotta get, I can't get it. Anyway, but you can see that works, so that works pretty good. Yeah, so that's the basics of the raycast. Raycast used for all sorts of things. Typically we use it for like shooter games, or if you're trying to you know, you shoot out like a line from one direction to another, 2D or 3D, and then whether it detects the thing that you're looking for. So it's sort of like what we had before with these box colliders, but a little bit different. All right, so that's basically it.